think we'll give everyone just another minute or two here and then we'll get started. Let's go ahead and get started, and the stragglers can join us when they're ready. So, all right. So, thank you everybody for joining today's career services workshop on the topic of negotiating pay and benefits to help you all prepare to go out and find the nursing job of your dreams after graduation. And I'm particularly excited about today's topic and the presenters that are teaching us about it. And I think it will benefit everyone in attendance, no matter your current role or employment goals. Today's presenters are Tara Black, she's a senior manager of talent systems, and Mikhail Sorensen, senior director, collaborator experience. And it's an understatement to say that they both have a wealth of knowledge on this topic, as they have been on both sides of these negotiations, and they're able to give us an absolute inside scoop on how it's done. So without further delay, I'm going to turn the time over to them.
Okay. Tara, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, we can do that. There we go. Okay, so as Ashley just mentioned, my name is Tara Black. My new title is Senior Manager People Elevation. So what that means is I have moved out of our CX operations area, which is collaborator experience, which is also HR, and into the organizational development side of the organization. So in short, we call that like OD. In Nightingale, we call that people elevation. So give you some title switch up there for everybody. I have my PHR, certified professional certification, human resources. That's been active since 2013. I do plan on keeping that active because I find the information to be extremely valuable, even in my new role, a bachelor's degree in business administration. From Utah State University. I am originally from Utah. I now live in Tampa, Florida, which I love it here. I'm also a certified diversity and inclusion professional, which I feel like I learn more and more every day and learn a lot about what I've done wrong in the past and what I can do better in the future. I have been in HR for over 15 years, and I have supported recruiting teams everywhere from being a recruiter to managing the recruiters for over 10 years. So hopefully my experience will help to guide you all in navigating compensation and strategies associating with negotiating it.
And my name is Mike Sorensen. I'm the Chief Collaborator Experience Officer. That just means I'm the head of HR for Nightingale College. Certified Senior Professional in Human Resources. I did receive my MBA from the University of Utah, and I have worked in HR and recruiting for over 26 years. So I've spent a lot of time, like Ashley mentioned, on both sides of this topic.
Okay, so to go over real quickly, just the agenda. What are we going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about the impact diversity has on compensation negotiations specifically, and give you some insights into gaining that edge in negotiating, tips on how to negotiate and what that process looks like. Also, everything is negotiable. And then into some tips and tricks, which Mike will cover with you. Okay, so first thing, and I know we get a lot of news headlines around this. There's a lot of dialogue about this, so I don't think that I'm bringing up anything new here. but we are aware that there is a gender gap in our pay equity in this country. The American Association of University Women conducted this study where they basically discovered that there is an impact of confidence in coming to the table and feeling like it's okay to negotiate your compensation. So 61% of men felt like they were very confident in negotiating it, and only 53% of women reported feeling confident. But what we saw is that there isn't that same gap, that same big gap in who actually negotiates. It says that 54% of the time men will negotiate, while 47% of the time women will negotiate. So what we see is that confidence has an impact on whether or not we're willing to negotiate, but not as much as we thought it necessarily did. However, if anywhere during the recruiting process, compensation was described as negotiable, then men were 3 times more likely to negotiate. So we're going to come to this like little area where we recognize that maybe the confidence isn't there, maybe the education or the experience with negotiating isn't there. It's a little uncomfortable. So we're going to ask you to lean in. That's how we start, right? Anything that's uncomfortable, we're going to lean into the discomfort. That's kind of where we're getting started here. All right, the other areas that we love to talk about compensation and those separations. Race. Clearly there is numerous studies out there about the compensation differences between races. And depending upon which races and ethnicities you are measuring, it can range anywhere from 8% all the way up to 30%. So that is an astounding difference in compensation just based on our racial and ethnic backgrounds. However, a little study done by University of Virginia found that it didn't matter if somebody was white or if somebody was Black, they were just as likely to negotiate salary. So if we're coming to the table and saying, hey, you know, my background really doesn't indicate whether or not I'm going to negotiate, then how do we get to this place where we still have an 8 to 30% gap? A lot of that is around the bias associated with who should be negotiating, who should be able to counter offer, who am I as a recruiter or as a hiring manager or as a human being comfortable with pushing back on that compensation. And that's a huge impact that everybody gets to take a look at. And I feel like we have a lot of initiatives going on to help drive some of that bias awareness. I'm also going to make a note here about intersectionality. This is this is a huge topic, and we're just going to note that it is relevant, but this is an enormous elephant that we don't have the time to, you know, eat today, but we're going to put it in here as relevant. And go ahead and go on to the next one. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of an understanding of what might impact the diversity on our compensation and negotiation, we're going to move into insights that can potentially give you an edge. Understanding what is happening is how you gain the insights. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of look at the existing structure, whether that structure is right or whether it is wrong. That's really irrelevant. This is the game that we're playing right now, right? So we need to gain the insights in order to be able to gain the edge in negotiating. So first thing we're going to do is acknowledge that deeply ingrained biases exist. I think that pretty much everybody ever has had an experience associated with pushing back on some biases, right? We know that that can be really disruptive. I'm a huge advocate for disruption. However, if my disruption is going to impact my compensation, I may need to pause a little bit, even if that is uncomfortable. So there we go, like, let's lean into here, right? Acknowledge those biases exist and recognize that we all have received social cues in our lives that help guide us in what societal standards are. And what we recognize here is that we don't want to be penalized when pushing back on those standards. So we're going to acknowledge and discuss some of the standards. Gender roles is a specific one where certain genders have attributes where passive and accommodating is part of the societal standard. This same philosophy can be applied to intersectionality. So we're going to note that being assertive and being bold isn't going to work for everyone. Sometimes we have to swim in the lane of what society has, expected out of us in order to gain the edge, right? So this is where we're going to dive into gaining some of that edge. The first thing is understand your recruiter. Start off with going into this discussion with a few things about what a recruiter is in the middle of, right? What they can discuss with you, how they can discuss it with you and approach it with you is entirely determined by the organization. They are provided standards and processes, and most recruiters tend to honor that, right? But the other thing to understand is that recruiters always want to fill the job. They just want to fill the job the right way. So knowing that that is, the lane that they have to operate in, we're going to now help you build some rapport with your recruiter by understanding their needs. Know what they're trying to accomplish. So you want to start out with doing your research. Anytime you are scheduled that job interview, go in and find out what the market is showing. You can find this information on all kinds of job boards. Probably the job board that you even found the job on is going to give you some information on compensation, not only for that organization specifically, but also for their competitors. Look at other job ads similar to the one that you have applied for, and also see if you know anybody. Reach out into your network to find out if you know anybody that either works for the company that you are interviewing with or works for one of their competitors. Because what you want to do is come to your interview with as much information about the organization that you're interviewing with and also their competitors. So go in with that wealth of knowledge. Then you can use those insights to help with your negotiation. Couple of things about your negotiation. You want to be accommodating. You want the recruiter to recognize that you care about what they need, because they will in turn care about what you need, and then they become your advocate in the organization. Make sure that you're keeping that relationship with your recruiter really warm, because again, they're your advocate on the inside. And know those numbers from the market research. All right, so let's dive into engaging in the negotiation process. A lot of times, whoever you are working with in the recruiting environment, whether that is the recruiter or the hiring manager, you are going to come into a situation where they want to discuss, where they raise the question of negotiation. A lot of times they ask you, what are you currently making? The nation has shifted away from asking this question, and there are even some states where it is illegal to come right out and say, what are you currently making? So if you're asked that question, be aware there are some things that you can kind of, redirect, and that's what we'll go into next. But most likely you're going to be asked, what are you wanting to make and what are your salary expectations? And these kinds of questions can throw us off a little bit. So a little, tip here is if you feel like you need to practice your interview questions, have somebody ask you those two questions so that you can get comfortable answering it, because they can be a little disarming. All right, so how to answer these questions. And I'm going to give you the order of the way I prefer the answers. There's a variety of answers here, so you can pick what works best for you. You can mash them up and mix them up, whatever you would like to do with it, as long as you practice it and get comfortable with it. So these are just in the order that I prefer. I'm looking forward to working for a company that pays me fairly within the market. What's the budget you have for this role? This is a really good question for an entry level or a career transition or a new specialization, right? Where it's, It's like, hey, I don't have a lot of room to negotiate. I'm really trying to break into this field, whatever this field is. So it's shifting the question back onto them to answer as well. I'm actually quite flexible on salary. If it's market value and a good fit, I would be happy with that. Both of these questions are great for those career transitions, entering into a new market or specialization. And even though, you know, some of you may have some nursing experience, medical or clinical experience, you may be trying to break into a new market, either within the next year or a few years down the road. So you can defer back to these as well. Okay, next one. Another answer, based off the research I've done, because you've done your research, and the competitors in this group, other healthcare businesses within that geography, in this area, this type of position pays between, and you're giving them those guardrails per year, or you can say per hour, and that's what I'd expect to be making. Then you flip it back around to them. Does that align with your budget? I'm glad that you asked this question because it's definitely a good idea for us to be on the same page. What is the salary range for this position? So you can see with all of these answers, it is providing them an answer, but then redirecting it back to them, right? And that's kind of where that accommodation comes from and where that rapport comes from, as it's a game of give, right? I'm going to give you the answer, and then I'm going to give you the platform to respond. This is my favorite way to answer it, and that's why it has that, you know, special little gold star. I'm glad you brought up compensation because it's definitely a good idea for us to be on the same page. But before we dive into the numbers, I'd really like to better understand what some of the needs are from this role or your organization. Do you mind if I ask a few questions first? The key about this phrasing right here is even if they don't bring up compensation and you are ready to know what compensation is, you can ask that bolded part pretty much at any point in time. Like, hey, let's get on the same page, right? And I'm going to say you are all in a demanding field. You have a right to know what an organization is going to be paying you before you spend a lot of time investing into that, right? So you can ask this from the recruiter at the end of the first interview, you know, maybe second interview, if you make it wherever you feel comfortable and whatever your needs are, feel free to also initiate the compensation conversation with that hiring group. All right. So another key thing for you to understand is how many things there are to negotiate. And these can also act as triggers in your negotiation. So when you're asking to understand more about the role and the organization, these are the questions that you want to discover. What is their anticipated start date? Are they short-staffed right now? Do they need somebody to start sooner in reality? And are you able to start sooner? Because if you are, there's a negotiating trigger, right? Where they're like, oh, hey, this is a job fair and we're really looking for anybody to start next month. But in reality, if you could start right away, that would be really helpful. Great. You've got that in your hat. Schedule. What do the shifts look like? Are they trying to, you know, cover that swing shift? Are they like graveyards? Nobody can staff for graveyards right now. And are you able to fill the gaps where their scheduling restrictions are and where their pain points are? Because if you're flexible in that arena, then you also have another negotiating tactic to throw into your hat. The other thing that I think is really valuable, especially for anybody working in the medical field, is your overtime pay negotiation. Standard across, you know, the United States as a labor requirement is 1.5 times your hourly rate, but many nurses make double time for any hours they work over 40 hours within the same work week. So use that as another negotiating trigger where, hey, they may not be able to negotiate in these other areas, but can you get double time for any hours worked over 40? Because that can have a big impact on your annual salary. All right, some other fantastic things. Is there a sign-on bonus? I don't know a nurse that hasn't had a sign-on bonus in years. So what are they offering to you? right? And is this another area where you can leverage some information? A lot of nursing, I'm going to say, I don't know a nurse that's had a sign-on bonus. A lot of the specializations don't offer that, right? Because there's more demand to get into that field. So there's more workforce trying to get into that field. But a lot of the jobs that are going to be available coming right out of your college and you're passing your NCLEX, there's going to be a lot of negotiation on the sign-on bonus, your retention bonus. So they may not budge on a sign-on bonus. They may not budge on what their flat rates are. But if you stick around for 6 months or a year, are they going to provide an additional bonus at that point? And do they have a compensation review period? So do they have a practice of when they review compensation of their nurses? And what does that look like? What is the frequency of that? What are the standards that you have to achieve in order to be eligible for a compensation increase? And then finally, PTO. And PTO is turning into another big hot button across the nation again. So all of these elements are negotiable, but finding out what the organization is offering initially is how you get to pull those triggers in the compensation negotiation.
All right, so this next slide, the balancing act. So it's always important to remember that you are in a position to make demands. You know, every news report you read on nursing talks about the nursing shortage everywhere. However, companies will have internal constraints on what they can and can't offer you. So it's always a good idea to find out where they are flexible and where they are not. So a lot of Tara's probing questions will help you identify, is PTO up for negotiation? Is salary up for negotiation? Bonus, overtime? You can find those out a lot of times by asking those questions from the recruiter. Another thing that is important is they have to believe they can get you. If you seem very inflexible, they may feel that you're out of their price range and you aren't willing to come down to where their range is. So again, that's where like knowing what their range is beforehand is helpful to know where to try and push to get higher up that range. If you're asking for over that range, that's where and you don't seem like you're willing to negotiate or have a discussion about it, they could just move on to another candidate, which obviously you don't want. And then always balance out requests by expressing your desire to work there and asking them how close they can get to your desired salary. So a lot of times you can say, hey, I'm trying to get X amount per year, but I really want to work here. And I would, love if you could, let me know how close you can get to that number. And so that leaves it that because they're going to go back and talk to the manager and say, hey, this person is asking for this, and the manager is going to be, oh, that's really close to the top of our range or outside of our range. And that's where, if you have a good relationship with your recruiter and you've expressed you're really excited about working there, the recruiter can be your advocate and say, listen, I know this person really wants to work here. It sounds like they do have some flexibility on salary. What's the best we can do? And then they'll come back to you with that. So the other thing to think about is how comfortable are you with negotiations? For some of you, this may be outside your comfort zone. And I joke here that it's only awkward the first 20 times. Most of us won't apply for 20 jobs in our lifetime. So because we do this infrequently, this may feel foreign every time you do it. You may need to kind of psych yourself up or have a refresher. We will make these slides available, so you're welcome to have these slides as something in your toolkit to help every time you go through this negotiation process, something to look back on and kind of refresh you. Another important thing to note is you don't need to be a type A personality. You should engage in a way that feels authentic to you as you discuss the role. And negotiating with mutual respect will get you very far. Another thing that I really like is the psychology of going into these type of events. And one of my favorites, I don't know how many of you have seen this TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. She talks about how to feel confident going into situations where you need to show confidence and strength. And she talks about how body language can affect the way we view ourselves and can help us to actually feel confident. So I put the link to the YouTube there if you want to watch later. But her big thing is like a 2-minute power pose. So a power pose is like a superhero pose. Like if you put both hands in the air and fists above your head, that's a power pose. Folding your arms very confidently. She talks about like putting your feet up on a desk and just holding that pose for 2 minutes will actually a lot of times help the chemistry in your brain to feel more powerful and help you to act more powerful. And it's a really helpful video to watch on that. And I think we do probably have time to watch this little snippet. So let's see if I can get that to work.
So I want to start by offering you.
Hold on. Okay. Let me share that one.
A free. So I want to start by offering you a free no tech life hack. And all it requires of you is this, that you change your posture for 2 minutes. I became especially interested in nonverbal expressions of power and dominance. And what are nonverbal expressions of power and dominance? Well, so in the animal kingdom, they are about expanding. So you make yourself big, you stretch out, and humans do the same thing. So they do this both when they have power sort of chronically, and also when they're feeling powerful in the moment. So powerful people tend to be, not surprisingly, more assertive and more confident. Physiologically, there also are differences on two key hormones, testosterone, which is the dominance hormone, and cortisol, which is the stress hormone. We decided to bring people into the lab and run a little experiment. And these people adopted for 2 minutes high power poses or low power poses. And I'm just going to show you 5 of the poses, although they took on only 2. This is what happens. They come in, they spit into a vial. We, for 2 minutes, say, you need to do this or this. We then ask them, how powerful do you feel on a series of items? And then we take another saliva sample. Here's what we find on testosterone. From their baseline when they come in, high power people experience about a 20% increase, and low power people experience about a 10% decrease. Here's what you get on cortisol. High power people experience about a 25% decrease, and the low power people experience about a 15% increase. So 2 minutes lead to these hormonal changes that configure your brain to basically be either assertive, confident, and comfortable, or really stress reactive. But the next question, of course, is, can power posing for a few minutes really change your life in meaningful ways? And so what matters and where you want to use this is evaluative situations. We decided that the one that most people could relate to was the job interview. What do you do before you go into a job interview? You do this, right? You're sitting down, you're looking at your notes, you're hunching up, making yourself small, when really what you should be doing maybe is this, like in the bathroom. Okay, so we bring people into a lab and they do either high or low power poses again. They go through a very stressful job interview. It's 5 minutes long. They are being recorded. They're being judged also. We then have these coders look at these tapes, 4 of them. They're blind to the hypothesis. They're blind to the conditions. They have no idea who's been posing in what pose. They end up looking at these sets of tapes and they say, oh, we want to hire these people, all the high power posers. We don't want to hire these people. But what's driving it? It's not about the content of the speech. It's about the presence that they're bringing to the speech. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. Tiny tweaks can lead to big changes. Before you go into the next stressful evaluative situation, for 2 minutes, try doing this in the elevator, in a bathroom stall, at your desk behind closed doors. That's what you want to do. Configure your brain to cope the best in that situation. Get your testosterone up, get your cortisol down, and it can significantly change the outcomes of their life. Thank you.
I'm about to cash this check from Rocky Mountain Power for almost $3,000.
Maybe I can stop it.
That's right. Rocky.
All right. Now if I can find our presentation again. Okay, so I want you to think about those high power poses the next time you have an important interview, or even a scheduled call with your recruiter or the hiring manager to negotiate something that can really help as you go in feeling confident. So that is the end of our presentation. We're here to answer any questions. I know last time we did this, people had a lot of questions. If you've ever wanted to ask a recruiter a question or just want our thoughts on things, we'd love to field any questions you might have.
Kylie did have a question. Kylie, do you want to ask it to the room? I don't know if anybody's driving and can read it or not. Or do you want me to read it?
Sure. I was just wondering if it's acceptable to bring notes when you go into an interview, or does that look unprofessional?
That is a great question. My recommendation is always bring a notebook. Something to write down with. It shows that you're prepared for it. And then you can do things like write their names down. So if you want to reach out to them later, or you meet them again, you want to be able to recognize them and say their name. But it's also a great way of being able to take those notes on the information that they provide you, or writing down questions that come up throughout the process. So yes, absolutely bring a notebook. Great question. Yep, Amanda says in the chat, you can compare notes from one company to another. Absolutely. I can't see the chat now. Let's see. The people raising hands.
Yeah, Chelsea, I think, was next.
All right, Chelsea, you want to ask your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've heard many times before that it's kind of like whoever mentions the number first in a negotiation loses, essentially. And so my question was, because I have basically I was working at like a job before where I was hired. I was like a temp to hire situation. And when I went into that where they were wanting to hire me, I asked them what their like range was, and they said they weren't able to tell me, like that they weren't allowed to disclose that. And so I was just curious how you would respond if an recruiter said that, or if that's common for them not to be able to share that information.
Okay.
I would go back to Tara's slide on just sharing the info you have, and saying, does that align with your budget? So if you can't tell me the number, that's fine. Here's my research. Does this align with your budget? Sometimes you can get it out of them that way. And then I do want to address your point, like whoever says the number first loses. They've actually done more research on that. And actually there's the effect of pegging the number. I don't know if you've heard of that, but like if they come out with a small number, you may tend to negotiate around their smaller number first. Whereas if you throw out something at the higher end of the range, now the negotiations start around the number that you put out first. So they've actually done research where it can benefit you to come out first, especially if you have done your homework. You know what nurses are getting paid in your area, especially for whatever type of nursing you're applying for. And if you know the range and you peg it towards the high end, they may be like, we can't quite pay you that, but we'll start from there and negotiate down towards the high end of where we can pay. So something to keep.
Those are such great questions, Chelsea.
It's a very, very helpful feedback. Thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, Penny, do you want to ask your question?
I do. So my question is, can you discuss any, I call them death traps on a resume versus something that really stands out and grabs their attention and at least gets you an interview? Because I know that your resume is a lot of times the first time, they take note of you. So, what are those common death traps or things that we should avoid or things that we should put on our resume to get that first interview?
Haha, that's a very complex question. I think a big part of that is going to vary depending upon the position that you're applying for and the organization that you're applying for. I don't know that I could do like blanket statement death traps, but we could go with like misspelled words. Anything that shouts your political advocacy is probably a death trap, regardless of the organization. I'll give you kind of an example. My sister was applying for a variety of nonprofits in our area, and she has done some nonprofit work that has been primarily around women's issues. And so putting stuff on her resume that wasn't like, hey, I was like putting together some serious protests, so that it didn't fall into that death trap depending upon who read it, because depending upon who reads it, they aren't going to want to see that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But so for instance, I have been told that a resume shouldn't be more than 1 page. I was told that it should be like maybe bullet pointed and highlighted versus like paragraph form, or the golden rule is no more than 3 pages. But what are your thoughts on that?
The first page is going to be what is seen. Anything beyond that may or may not get reviewed in detail by your recruiter or your manager. So whatever you can do to make your relevant information on your first page, put it on your first page. So it may not be chronological order work experience, right? It may be, instead of doing that, you're transitioning it and saying, this is my relevant professional experience for the role that I'm going for. I think another way of avoiding a death trap is, if there's an organization that you are specifically targeting, going onto their website and looking at things around their mission statement can be really helpful, because if you can infuse even some of those hot words from the mission statement into your professional summary or into some of your relevant work experience, then it's going to help you stand out. So keep whatever formatting you decide consistent throughout the resume. Keep what's on your resume relevant to the position that you are applying for. And outside of that, I don't know that length of resume actually matters. Another rule of thumb is like within the last 10 years. I mean, a lot of those are really subjective, and it depends upon the recruiter and it depends upon the hiring manager. Big recommendation is to always have somebody else review your resume who will go through it with a fine-tooth comb.
And I'll just add to that, there are so many good templates out there for resumes. So I would say look for a template that like speaks to you and you're like, oh, this one looks really good to me, looks professional, I like the way it's organized. And then I would just pick one that you really like and then use that. And like Tara said, following Tara's guidelines, make sure if it's over a page that the most important information is on that first page.
Do you have resources where we can send our resumes in and the school can review them?
Yeah, so I can answer that one. So I am the career services specialist. And so, yes, definitely. You can always send me an email to careerservices@nightingale.edu, and I will review your resume, and I'll send feedback and tips and like suggested maybe edits and things like that.
I think it's great that you asked about pitfalls. I actually had a conversation with a recruiter not that long ago, not a recruiter in our organization, but I said to this recruiter, I can't stand it when somebody puts their photo on their resume. Like, I don't like it at all. And I just want to bypass them because they did that. And her response was, I love it when people put their photo on their resume. That makes me want to talk to them. So, I mean, it's just, you never know. You just never know. Try and, cast a wide net.
And when
Good
I was
questions,
recruiting,
though.
Tara, I would crop out the photos for anyone who put it on when I passed it to the hiring manager, so they weren't making choices based on looks. So
Yes. Yes. I've also removed names, from resumes that I've passed on because I didn't want that to be an influence of decision either. So. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple in the chat. So the first one is Amber asked, do you have any books on negotiating pay with new grad nurses? So maybe like book suggestions on the topic.
Books? I don't know of any books that just really dive into negotiating compensation. There's a lot of articles that are out there. I'd say just study the PowerPoint because pretty much all the best stuff is in it.
I
really,
don't know of a negotiating book off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are a lot out there. If this is something you want to really dive into, I'm sure you could find a resource out there.
Yeah, I say in practice. Like going through practicing just saying these statements and getting comfortable with saying these statements and asking these questions, it takes that edge off when you're in the middle of it. So the amygdala doesn't fire and you go, I really want to make 60,000 a year because I'm dying to make 60,000 a year. Other questions?
It looks like Amber has one. What about non-experienced nurse coming right out of nursing school? What is too outrageous of a pay of starting off? So any tips on like someone who's new? I don't have a lot of experience. I want to get my foot in the door, but I also want to get paid fairly for my first role.
A lot of this depends upon your geography, right? So I live in Florida. I don't know if there's any other learners in here that live in Florida, but this is one of the lowest paid states in the country for nursing. So the type of pay that you would make here versus the type of pay that you are going to make in like Colorado, it may not be the same. And depending upon the city you're looking at, it may not be the same. So it goes back to really that research, getting onto those job boards, and looking and seeing what is available in that area. You can also look at some national averages through Bureau of Labor Statistics that can give you some projections of what it looks like in the future based on specialization. So if you're going, I'm kind of, on the fence about these two different fields, but money is really what's important to me, you can get on and look at some of those future projections as well. When it comes to the actual negotiating of it, though, any of these statements that were provided in here and follow-up questions are really going to help you, whether you are a brand new grad or you are shifting your nursing specialization 4 years from now.
And a few other resources that, Tara, maybe we should make a slide for the next time we present. Glassdoor is an excellent place to go in and do research on a company and get a feel for like what kind of interview questions do they ask, what's the interview process. And then salary.com is a good one where you can put in the geography you live in and what position you're looking at, and it can give you a good ballpark of what the numbers might look like in your area. So those are some good resources that can help you as you're trying to pinpoint like what could a new grad in my area make, because you can put in your experience on payscale.com and it will tell you where they estimate that salary will fall. And again, that's just giving you kind of the overall guideline. The specific facility that you're interviewing with, they may pay a little lower than that. They may pay a little higher than that, right? Because that's giving you an average. But it should give you a ballpark number where if you do it tactfully and say, hey, my research shows that this position should pay between this much and this much, does that align with what you guys are? And that's where, they may say, hey, we can't share that, but yeah, that's pretty close. Or they may come out and say, ours is from this amount to this amount. So really, it's just kind of tactfully kind of finding out what they're willing to share and asking it in a way that invites them to work with you.
All right, do we have any other questions before we wrap this up? Okay. So I think I speak for all of us when I say that that was incredibly informative and empowering. And this meeting was recorded. And like I said in the chat, it will be posted on Nightingale Connect. If you have not already registered your account, I posted a link in the chat so that you can click on that and you can do so. That is also where you will see and sign up for upcoming workshops next semester, as well as other career services resources. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day and weekend.
And we wish you the best as you go out into the world and find your new role. So good luck to everyone.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Good luck.